action the Scottish Government is taking to deal with sexual harassment?
Fair enough. Sexual harassment's been in the news. There have been some accusations of cases in Holyrood, so that's a relevant issue for the Scottish Government to address.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, I'd like to explain first of all why I am answering this question when normally it would fall to the Equalities Cabinet Secretary Angela Constance. The Government wants to make clear that it is the conduct and behaviour of men that needs to change. Therefore, as the most senior male minister in the Scottish Government, I wanted to answer this question and to make clear that it's up to men to make these changes, and men must examine their own behaviour.
So, what happens after the next Islamic terror attack? Does the Scottish Government put up Humza Yousaf as the most senior Muslim in the Scottish Government and say the Scottish Government want to make it clear that this is a problem with the behaviour of Muslims? The conduct and behaviour of Muslims must change. It's up to Muslims to make these changes. Muslims must examine their own behaviour. How about that? That would be decried as Islamophobic. You're tarring all Muslims with the same brush. Most Muslims are peaceful and condemn terrorism. Nicola Sturgeon would rush to the defence of Muslims, and quite rightly, because it would be very unfair to speak in that way and to treat all Muslims in that way. So how come it's okay to treat men that way? Identity politics trumps logical consistency, so somehow or other it seems okay. How dare John Swinney lecture men on the need to improve their conduct? The vast majority do not need to improve their conduct. Newsflash for the Scottish Government. Men are not an homogenous group that can be singled out for special criticism, and they don't share collective responsibility for the behaviour of any individual men. One can just sense the joy of the Holyrood gender warriors at the spectacle of John Swinney standing to eat humble pie as a representative of the male of the species, meekly submitting to the demands of his feminist masters. Sadly, a huge number of MSPs regard it as their mission in Holyrood to progress the battle of the sexes. Being wed to extreme feminist ideology, it's no surprise that the Scottish Government is keen to treat men as an inferior and dangerous group in need of re-education.
Sexual harassment or abuse in the workplace or anywhere else is completely unacceptable and must stop, just as the underlying attitudes and inequalities that perpetuate it must also stop.
So tackling the underlying attitudes and inequalities. Attitudes, yes. Sexuality is a powerful force that needs strict boundaries if it's not to become destructive. It's the erosion of these boundaries that leads to the sort of abuse that's sadly so common. The devaluing and trivializing of sex over several decades is the responsibility of those who encouraged it. And who were they? People of a very progressive mindset, including a lot of feminists. And what they've achieved is liberation from the previous constraints on sexual behaviour, and we're now living with the consequences of that. But you also said inequalities, the inequalities that perpetuate sexual harassment. Here the sleight of hand begins. We're leaving the problem of bad behaviour and we're wandering seamlessly into feminist theory. Inequality causes harassment. It's all to do with a power imbalance. Well, specific cases of sexual harassment might involve a power imbalance between the individuals involved. But inequalities between groups don't lead to sexual harassment. You don't solve the sexual harassment problem by achieving gender equality, by which they mean equality of outcome, not opportunity. Can anyone seriously posit the theory that sexual harassment at Holyrood stems from a power imbalance in the Scottish Parliament with a female First Minister and until recently leaders of the two biggest parties? When I watch goings on at Holyrood, I often think that the female MSPs can be quite strident and the male MSPs are often quite mild-mannered. If it was about power, I think it could well be the men who are getting sexually harassed at Holyrood. Mind you, seeing John Swinney being pressurised into making this statement could be seen as a case of gender-based workplace humiliation. Maybe you should phone the new hotline.
What we're all discussing today is not a sex scandal, but an abuse of power.
So there we are. It's not about sex, it's all about power. This is the cultural Marxist view coming through. Divides the world into oppressed and oppressor groups locked in mortal combat. Everything's seen as a power struggle between competing sections of society. So sexual harassment's not really about sex, it's about power. Really? How come it's almost always attractive young women that are targeted then? We hear the same sort of line with rape. It's not about sex, it's about power, but there's no evidence that that's true. It's a fanciful theory driven by ideology. Sexual abuse is mainly perpetrated by men against women, but there's two reasons for that. One reason is that the sex drive of men is known to be stronger in general than the sex drive of women, and also men in general tend to be more aggressive than women. It's not to do with a power imbalance. Now, to suggest that a rapist or a sexual harasser is actually doing what he's doing in order to maintain the dominance of males over females is just completely ridiculous. Why would they take that risk of disgrace and imprisonment in order to maintain the position of males over females? It makes no sense. But of course, feminists are trying to link sexual harassment with their wider objectives, which is to get more women like them into senior positions. This feminist theory is utterly divorced from reality. It should be confined to consenting academics in the privacy of their own university departments. But instead it dominates the Scottish Parliament. The Labour MSP Daniel Johnson asked a question. No sooner had he finished, the buzzers were being hit. MSPs were demanding to speak. Here are their responses.
And I am deeply concerned that a question such as that asked by Daniel Johnson may give the impression that in some way women should avoid these settings in order to protect themselves. Indeed, in the worst case scenario, this could be viewed in some way as victim blaming.
Alcohol is not an excuse.
It is never an excuse.
Are no excuse for such behaviour.
Alcohol is never an excuse for...
Say that alcohol is not an excuse.
Victim blaming, alcohol as an excuse. Whatever did he say? What could this question have been? You would guess he must have said something like, may I suggest that women who have suffered from sexual assault have brought it on themselves by frequenting seedy bars, and abusing men can't really be held responsible for this sort of thing, as it's inevitable when a man's had a few drinks. Let's see what he really said.
But let me begin by saying there is no excuse or satisfactory justification for the behaviour and incidents of sexual harassment that have come to light in recent weeks, full stop. Does the corporate body agree with me that if we are to tackle this culture that has given rise to these incidents, we must question what role alcohol has played, and by extension the policies and practices of Parliament with regard to it?
The reaction that question got was just bizarre. It's like seeing robots with the same faulty program. They spot key words and launch into a standard speech. The quality of debate often in Holyrood is extremely poor. So who stands against this demonization of men, this unfair treatment? No one, not even a little bit. I haven't edited out the people who spoke against it. There were none. Now, maybe some MSPs would say, well, this wasn't the time to talk about it. Well, just let me know when it is the time. I don't want to miss it. 80% of the MSPs wave the flag for hardline feminists, and again, 20% wave the white flag. No MSP, male or female, was prepared to speak out and object to men being treated collectively as a problem. I noticed Murdo Fraser was there in that debate. I like Murdo Fraser. A few months ago, we got into a spot of bother for calling the Greens lentil-wearing sandal munchers or something. No, he's not afraid to risk a bit of controversy, but not on this sort of issue. Every video I make ends in the same way, saying, why will no MSP say the sort of things that I've said here? What are they scared of?
Barriers is a threat to possible.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and follow us or like our Facebook page. Thanks.